Ex-wife thought she'd get the house and savings, so I let her lawyer discover there was nothing to take. My wife had an affair with her gym trainer. She asked for half of everything in the divorce, but she didn't know that the house and savings were in my father's name. I never thought I'd share my story like this, but here I am. I'm 38 years old, and I've been working as an accountant at the same firm for over 12 years. I've always been the type to stay calm and rational, and I think that's why I haven't lost my mind through all of this. My wife Joyce is 35, and we've been together for almost 10 years. We don't have kids, which I used to feel a little regret about, but now I see it as a blessing. The stability I once thought we had, the love that felt unbreakable, turned out to be nothing more than an illusion. Joyce hasn't worked since we got married. She used to work in marketing, but after we tied the knot, she wanted to focus on building our life together. I was happy to focus on building our life together. I earned enough to support both of us, and I believed in supporting her dreams. We had a modest home and some savings, nothing fancy but comfortable. Life felt good, simple, and predictable. I thought we had found our rhythm as a couple. We were partners in every sense of the word. I was willing to do whatever it took to make her happy and ensure that she never felt the need to work if she didn't want to. But recently, something had shifted. Joyce started acting differently. She was more distant, and there seemed to be an emotional gap growing between us. She began staying out later, saying it was just time with friends or longer gym sessions. However, she seemed annoyed whenever I asked her about it. I didn't push the issue. I thought it might just be a rough patch, like every marriage has. I tried to convince myself it would pass. I knew Joyce would come back to me. I had this feeling that something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It was like watching our marriage unravel in slow motion, and I couldn't stop it. One night, Joyce was in the shower, and her phone buzzed. It wasn't unusual, but I glanced at the screen out of reflex. The message was from someone named James. It said, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, babe." My stomach turned. I stared at the phone, feeling a strange rebeat. I unlocked my phone and opened the messages. There was a string of messages, each one more damning than the last. My wife had been seeing James for months. He was her gym trainer. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the texts. Each word cut deeper than the last. They were making plans for their future. It didn't include me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My wife had checked out of our marriage long before I even noticed. I sat there on the edge of the bed, feeling everything and nothing at the same time. The woman I had trusted, the person I built my life around, was cheating on me. I didn't feel the anger right away. I felt a cold, empty numbness. I knew I needed to talk to her. I also knew I had to keep calm. Losing my temper wouldn't help. It never does. My mind was racing with questions. I couldn't make sense of it. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, feeling everything and nothing at the same time. The woman I had trusted and built my life around was cheating on me. I didn't feel the anger right away. I just felt cold, old, empty, and numb. I knew I needed to talk to her, but I also knew I had to keep calm. I knew that losing my temper wouldn't help. It never does. My mind was racing with questions, but no answers seemed to make sense. I replayed our life together, trying to pinpoint where it all went wrong. It wasn't anything I had done wrong. I was left with a crushing emptiness, the kind that only comes when you realize that the love you thought was unbreakable was a lie. When Joyce came out of the shower, I handed her the phone. She looked at me, and I asked her to explain. At first, she tried to deny it, brushing it off as a joke between friends. But when I read some of the text out loud, her expression changed. She stopped trying to deny it and looked at me, her face blank. She said she wanted a divorce. There was no apology, no regret, just those words, cold and final. I remember feeling like the ground beneath me had disappeared. This was the woman I had loved, the person I had trusted above all else, and in that moment, she showed no remorse, no emotion. It was like she had already moved on, as if our marriage had meant nothing to her. I felt like a stranger in my own life. She wanted half of everything, the house, the savings, everything we had built. She argued that she deserved it. She'd given up her career to support me, so I just looked at her, my mind racing. but I stayed calm. I nodded and told her I wouldn't fight her on it. She could have half of what she thought I had. At least she looked surprised. I think she expected me to fight back or break down, but I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. In that moment, I realized she didn't know me as well as she thought. She expected me to react with rage or desperation, but instead I felt an odd sense of clarity. This was the end, and I needed to be smart about it. What Joyce didn't know was that most of our assets weren't even in my name. Years ago, when I started making decent money, my father suggested that I keep the big things, like the house and savings, in his name. He said it was a way to protect myself just in case anything ever went wrong. I trusted his judgment, and now I was thankful I had the house we lived in. Most of our savings were technically my dad's, and I thought he was being overprotective. But now I saw it for what it was, a lifeline. My father had given me a way to protect myself from the fallout of Joyce's betrayal. Instead of dragging this out into a nasty court battle, I suggested we go through mediation. I thought it would be simpler, less costly, and maybe even less painful for both of us. Joyce agreed, probably thinking she still walked away with a lot. She hired an aggressive lawyer, one of those who promise to take everything they can. Meanwhile, I hired a lawyer who specialized in complicated financial situations. I wanted someone who understood how to navigate these waters quietly. I wasn't looking for a fight. I just wanted to protect what was rightfully mine. I wanted to be done with this and move on without the drama that Joyce seemed intent on creating. The first step was disclosing assets and laying everything out on the table. When Joyce and her lawyers saw length, the documents showed that they were confused. On paper, I didn't have much. I just had a modest bank account, my car, and a few personal items. The house was owned by my father, and the savings were also in my father's name. I wasn't hiding anything. I was just being honest about what was actually mine. Joyce's lawyer tried to find flaws in my story, but there were none. Everything was in order. Just as I had said, Joyce's face showed disbelief. It was as if she couldn't believe that her plan had fallen apart so easily. Joyce looked at me, her face pale with shock. She started yelling, accusing me of lying and hiding money, but I just sat there calm, repeating the same thing. Everything I had was right there. There was nothing hidden. Her lawyer looked frustrated. I could tell they hadn't expected this. They demanded a deeper investigation, convinced that I must have hidden assets somewhere. They hired a forensic accountant, someone to dig through every financial record and every transaction. At first, I felt a bit anxious, not because I had anything to hide, but because I knew this would take a while. After talking it over with my lawyer, though, I realized I had nothing to fear. Everything was in order. There was no secret stash of money, no hidden accounts, just the simple truth. Most of what Joyce thought she was entitled to was never in my name to begin with. As the investigation went on, Joyce grew more and more frustrated. She couldn't understand why there wasn't more money. Then there was James. When Joyce first told him she wanted to leave me for him, he seemed totally on board. They had this fantasy of starting a new life together, but as the divorce started to get complicated, James began to pull back. It seemed like he wasn't ready for the reality of the situation, the financial mess, and the scrutiny. I heard that he started avoiding her and making excuses. It turned out he wasn't as committed as Joyce thought. The cracks in their perfect fantasy were beginning to show. The cracks were starting to show, and I couldn't help but feel a grim sense of satisfaction. Joyce tried a new angle. She started turning up at my office, making scenes, and threatening to ruin my career if I didn't give her more money. She told everyone who would listen that I was abusive and that I had hidden our wealth. Some mutual friends started reaching out, some confused, some supportive. It hurt to see her try to destroy my reputation, but I stayed focused. I had proof of her affair, and I documented every interaction. We had all her threats on record. I knew that if this went to court, I needed to be prepared. I wasn't going to let her lies destroy everything I had worked for. It was exhausting, but I knew that the truth was on my side, and that kept me going. Eventually, we ended up in court. Joyce testified first, telling the judge how she had sacrificed her career for me, only to be betrayed. She painted herself as the victim, crying as she talked about how I had lied to her. Then my lawyer presented the evidence, including the texts, photos, and statements from some of her friends who knew about the affair. Joyce's story began to crumble. The judge could see through her act, and the more she tried to defend herself, the more desperate she sounded. The evidence was undeniable, and it became clear that her financial demands were driven by greed, not fairness. The courtroom was silent as the truth came out, and I could see the realization on Joyce's face. She had lost. When it was my turn, I kept it. I simply explained that my assets had always been in my father's name, that ID had provided full disclosure from the beginning, and that I had tried to settle things peacefully. The judge saw through Joyce's lies and ruled in my favor. She wasn't entitled to half of that house or the savings. She got a small amount of alimony, enough to cover her legal fees, but nothing more. As the verdict was R, I felt an immense sense of relief. It had been a long, stressful process, but it was finally over. The stress, accusations, and uncertainty I'd been carrying around for months were suddenly gone. Joyce, on the other hand, was in a bad way. She screamed that the system was unfair and that I'd cheated her out of what was rightfully hers. She stormed out of the courtroom, leaving her lawyer looking exhausted outside. Outside the courthouse, Joyce made a statement. She yelled that she'd appeal the decision and that she wouldn't give up, but everyone knew she didn't have the money for it. Her lawyer had made it clear. During the trial, she told me she was running out of funds. I heard she was still borrowing money from family and friends just to get by. I thanked my lawyer, feeling grateful for his guidance and for my father's foresight. Without their help, I don't know what kind of mess I'd be in right now. Moving on won't be easy, but I'm ready to start over. This chapter of my life is finally closed, and I can now focus on building something new and better. I've learned a lot from this experience, and I'm determined not to make the same mistakes again. In the weeks that followed, I started putting my life back together. It was strange waking up in an empty house, but I soon began to find comfort in the quiet. I started going back to the gym and focusing on my health. I also reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years. I'd been so wrapped up in my life with Joyce that I even started cooking, which I'd never had time for before. It was small, but it felt like a step forward. I started to see the emptiness not as something to fear, but as a blank canvas, a chance to start fresh and build a life that was truly mine. One afternoon, I got a call from a mutual friend, someone who had heard about the divorce but hadn't picked sides. She told me that Joyce was struggling. James had broken things off, and she was living with her parents, barely making ends meet. Part of me felt a twinge of sympathy, despite everything. I had loved her once, but another part of me knew that this was the result of her choices. She had betrayed me, tried to take everything from me, and now she was facing the consequences. I didn't feel joy in her suffering, but I didn't feel sorrow either. It was simply the reality. I don't know what the future holds for Joyce. I've spent too long worrying about her and us, and now it's time to focus on me. I'm not bitter. In fact, I'm grateful that I found out the truth before it was too late, that I had the support to get through it, and that I can start afresh. My outlook on life has changed, but it's not a negative change. In fact, it's a positive one. I've learned the value of protecting myself and not giving everything to someone without ensuring I'm secure. I've learned that love isn't enough if there's no trust. I've learned that sometimes the best thing you can do is let go of the past and move forward. The journey ahead won't be easy, but I'm ready for it. It'll be easy, but I'm ready for it. I'm ready to rebuild and find happiness again on my own terms. Maybe one day I'll meet someone who will truly appreciate the person I am, but for now, I'm content to live my life free from lies and betrayal and ready to see what the future holds. The road ahead might be uncertain, but I faced the worst and I'm still standing. And for now, that's enough.